We're here to talk about building a positive security culture. And that really, for me, it's exciting that I was asked to speak about this because I've been a part of the Living Security family for about 5.5, almost 6 years now. And it all started with building a positive security culture. I was a client for almost 3 years, and now I've been in the client success team for about 2.5, almost three. And when I brought Living Security in, it was all around their physical escape rooms. So if there are any OG Living Security fans here, the physical escape rooms were a kit, and you'd set them up and you would bring people into a conference room and you would teach cybersecurity through these escape rooms. And it was amazing. You'd get all these amazing learnings. People would share feedback. It was extremely interactive. You got to give out swag. We had our C-suite do it, and it was a great experience. Um, Now, there were two things that were kind of missing from that whole experience. One, I didn't really know if I was harping on the right things. Like, we could sit here all day and say that phishing was the biggest problem, but maybe I really should have been more focused on the passwords or the MFA style puzzles they had to complete. And the second thing is I had no idea if these rooms were actually accomplishing anything at the end. So I'd host a room, or I'd fly out to our office in Salt Lake City and I would do sessions for 6 straight hours. But I had no idea how those people that escaped the room actually performed in their day-to-day jobs moving forward. So one of the things that I'm so excited to talk about today is the fact that we have mechanisms through Living Security that can actually help with that, both scorecards and workflows. They take into account the individualistic nature of people, the pride they take in doing right for the company, and they give you some metrics to report on, both are you focusing on the right things, and are you, are you making a difference to how they behave? So I think there's an unwritten rule in cybersecurity webinars that you have to cite either the Verizon data, that you have to cite the Verizon data breach report. And so I went out and found 4 different metrics that have nothing to do with that report, just to try and be a little different. But I don't really know if I accomplished much there. So while I probably don't need to convince anyone here, if you're in this track, and I saw names that I know have been in this track all day, um, it's still worth looking at this because I think the qualifiers that I've highlighted on this screen are a really important reminder that just engaging people and building a culture isn't necessarily the end goal, right? We need to be building a program that meets these qualifiers. If you want results, it must be strong, it must be comprehensive, it needs to do something that is continuous, and the information you share has to be clear and accessible to your employees. A robust program is effective. You can reduce policy violations, which I saw someone in the chat had a great word for that earlier. I can't remember if it was called a redirect metric or something. But reduction in violations is an important one to be tracking on. It decrease in insider threat, something that Shawnee touched on in this track earlier. Are you increasing report rates or increasing password manager usage? There was a conversation about those earlier. So to accomplish all of those metric-based things, you can't just have the check the box kind of program. And I'm not insinuating that anyone does, but that's important to start out with. So when we look at what a lot of programs today are doing, and many of you are probably doing these things really effectively, but they're not, we are pushing, here in this session, I want to talk about scorecards and some of our automation work, because I think there's a differentiator from those and what we're looking at here. And so here are just a few pillars that you probably have in your program. I'd be shocked if you're not doing most, if not all of these. And where I like to, start is with your annual role-based training, your phishing simulations. They are checking the box, but at some point, are they actually being as effective as we want them to be? Does telling people to report everything end up with the SOC being overloaded by people reporting spam instead of the right emails? What if we could really hone in on reporting the important things and not having people be simulation paranoid? When we look at gamification and we look at communications or blogs, are they actually effective? It's great to have people engaged and posting in Slack channels, but can we pull any metrics out of that? And then when we look at a security champions program, those are not easy things to do. And, kudos to anyone here who runs one of those programs, but it does take a lot of effort. You have to find the right people. You have to reach out to them in the right ways and kind of tailor things to their higher level of engagement and skill. So, I started getting into some of where those engagements can fall short. I'm not saying they always do, but a lot of that work is one size fits all. Your annual training, your communications, your simulations, even if you do some role-based items, a lot of it is one size fits all, and it lacks some individual accountability. I can assure you that there are plenty of highly technical people in your business, and when they open a company-wide security awareness email, they probably roll their eyes, say, I already know this, and they don't need to, it doesn't apply to them. Similarly, you probably have people who maybe they don't care about the file sharing tool because they don't ever move data from outside the organization. So they're going to just kind of in one ear, out the other with that kind of stuff. The other, downside to some of those are resource constraints. I think the average team size in the industry for security awareness is still 1.5 FTEs. And I've got a lot of clients that are down to one employee, and it's not even full 100% commitment to culture, et cetera, things like this. So how can we help create some automation, take things off your plate so that you're getting in touch with and building culture, but it's not requiring you to be hands-on, pulling email lists out, uploading things into a mail merge, things like that. The other thing, if we look at that prior slide, there's a pretty narrow scope of metrics that most of you would probably tend to own. Your completion and on training is a metric. We all know the phishing metrics, and I'm glad we're moving away from just clicks and into reporting, but still a bit of a siloed metric. There are so many other valuable day-to-day behaviors and external threats impacting your employees that should be factored into how you drive culture. Your people are, being attacked by external threats. How are you using that to drive culture and to help keep them aware and to help make them an actual active part of being an adversary? They're engaging in things that aren't just reporting phish that can help the business. Maybe they're using MFA, or they've opted into the password manager that so many of us in the original keynote said is not enforced. There are more metrics here that prove the positive effect of people that may not be in your scope. And lastly, frequency, consistency. We talked about how these are all hard things to do. They're even harder to do often. So we want to look at these scorecards, these workflows, as a way to get past that. So when we look at our solution that we're suggesting here, scorecards, workflows, those are the big differences that we're focused on. How do we personalize them to the employees that you're speaking to? Speaking to someone about the exact things they've done in the last quarter really resonates. It makes a difference and it clicks with them. They realize that they're not part of some bigger one-size-fits-all program, and things can be tailored to them, and that really will drive a sense of ownership. The other thing is, I just mentioned on that last slide, there are so many metrics, so many behaviors. Do you actually care about them all? Living Security, our unified platform captures over 300 behaviors and threats from across your security stack. Things that you would typically send to a SIM are also valuable to helping with mitigating, measuring, driving culture through human risk management. But of all 300 of those, do you care about all 300? So we want to help you silo in on just the ones that are important. And if we have some time at the end, I've got a resource I can show you that even looks at a few of those behaviors. The other important piece of this is when you engage, when you send scorecards, when you send automated notifications to people as positive reinforcement,
50 hours, right? We're not tracking that.
Know if it's actually working, or can you see that it is making a difference, that people are changing those behaviors? Are they following the call to action? The other important part is that call to action. It's the clear guidance. We talk about, clear and accessible policies. Maybe people are confused on which phishing button to use because they've got the innate Microsoft one, and that needs clear guidance. Or maybe you've made a change to your password reset policy. You've got rid of the 90-day reset. Clear guidance that gets in front of them is important beyond just the once a year, we've changed our policy, now please sign off on it notification. And then lastly, real-time engagement. Reinforcing vigilant behaviors is extremely important. Getting in front of people when it's fresh in their minds is extremely effective. There's metrics across just about any industry to prove that. And we want to use that to our advantage for driving this culture. So let's start getting into the weeds of scorecards a little bit. Some things that our clients and our prospects have been asking us about, and what does it look like to implement scorecards at your business? So the first thing that we always tell people to think about, if they haven't already come to us with this thought, is what is the organizational culture? Now, not every business and not every employee is ready to have their behaviors over the last 90 days sent to them. It could feel a little bit big brother. So a big thing to factor in is culture. How do you communicate with people and explain that this isn't big brother? We're not creating new data. We're reusing what's already there to help keep you and the business safe. And we're trying to empower you. This is something that you're not being punished on. This is a mechanism that you can be a part of. In the last, or maybe 2 sessions ago, someone mentioned an opt-in fishing tournament. That's fantastic because it's putting people in control. Maybe scorecards isn't ready for a wide rollout, but you can do some sort of an opt-in program or a pilot program that does allow you to gather a little bit of feedback and start measuring the culture. We'll also get into this more in the next slide, but some cultures aren't quite ready to have people actually be told the threats against them. All they're thinking about is, what are my behaviors? And being told that you're risky because you're attacked constantly may not resonate necessarily. So culture is a huge consideration piece. The next thing goes back to, of those hundreds of behaviors, what do you care about? When you're looking at the next 12 months with your CISO, what are the big tools you're onboarding? What are the big policy changes? What are the industry-based changes that you think you'll be making? Password managers are optional right now. Let's say you're getting ready to make it enforced over the next 6 months for your elevated access users. Well, we want to start measuring password manager usage. We want to start measuring if they have strong master passwords, if they're, using it to share credentials internally instead of using plain text, things like that. So we're going to want to think about what behaviors, what external threats get included into the scorecard. Then there's the call to action. Are you trying to get people to change how they behave, or are you simply creating awareness? Is the call to action a behavior change, or is the call to action just go to this internal web page and gain more visibility into something? And that's different for every client. The next bit here, custom links, selection of insights, branding, messaging, etc., kind of ties back into that culture piece. And it's just all about, how do you take this communication? That's what it is. You're going to need Corp Com's approval on it, and make sure that it actually fits to what you need. There might be certain words that you never want to use. For example, there are a lot of people who hate to call it a phishing test. Let's make sure test is never in it. We don't put that in our stuff, but that's, an example. Maybe you don't want to call it a remediation training. Maybe you want to call it a supplemental training, or some sort of additional support training that you're assigning people in real time as a workflow. So those are important things to factor in. So I apologize a little bit here. It looks like the human risk index, when I moved to PowerPoint from Google Drive, we dropped to a second row. But we have 2 scores here at Living Security that we work with our clients on. And I think these are a really, really important part of culture consideration. The behavior score versus the human risk index. So your behavior score runs 0 to 100. It's like a report card, and it is the things your people know. It is how they perform on phishing simulations. It's how they do with their training. It's, are they using MFA? It's when they log in, is SSO turned on? It's, did they reset credentials? It's, have they gone to a risky website? Things that your employees control. The behavior score is important because not all companies have a culture that's ready to talk about external threats. And it's also great because your call to action is extremely clear. You can section down on, these are the exact behaviors we want you thinking of. And putting those behaviors in front of an employee shows a serious transparency. It builds trust, which builds culture. An employee who has to come face the facts of, this is how I've performed, if it was not great, is going to want to take pride in improving. They're not going to want to receive the same 30 out of 100 scorecard next year. And they're going to want to be able to look at the coworker next to them, whether it's remote or in person, and say, oh, you're a 50, well, I'm a 60. And you want to drive that culture of healthy competition. Again, though, positive culture here, we probably want to use some branding and marketing to say, we're not punishing people. We're not putting people down. This is a building of each other up kind of opportunity. And if your business is right for it, the human risk index is the more complicated version of this that factors in, like, it looks like a credit score, 0 to 1,000. It factors in not just their behaviors, but also their role and the external threats against them. So the executive that gets targeted is going to have a different risk score than the intern who has no access and gets targeted. And the contractors who have elevated access are going to have a very different risk score algorithm than just the standard employees that only really use the internet for their day-to-day jobs. The human risk index will factor those things in. Malware being targeted on their devices, if they have unusual login address, unusual IP address flags, things like that. And important here is to factor in, like, we're not punishing people. Unusual IP address comes up all the time. I was at the airport. We get scorecards here at Living Security. We use the human risk index. I got mine last week, and I had an unusual IP address counting against my score. I know exactly what it was. I was traveling earlier last month, and I was at an airport, really had something to get done. I had to log in and get an email out. That's a calculated risk I took. I knew that I was on public Wi-Fi, but it was part of my day-to-day job. I'm not being punished for that. I'm simply being made aware these things do bring risk to the organization. Let us help educate you on how to improve. So in the same way you might tell someone that their score is impacted by that, I was also given some resources like, hey, considering using a secure hotspot or consider using a VPN. Can that work? Wait until you land and get to the office. So there were resources being provided to me. And that's a really big part of these scorecards is how can we provide the right resources to people based off the behaviors that you're showing? When we look at the customization options on these scorecards, that's something you can do. You can change the text that says this is a factor. You can even change and completely remove something from counting against the score, but keep people aware they're doing it. And all of this factors back into the clear, accessible documentation we wanted to talk about earlier, right? So when someone, in this example that's on the screen here, they have to complete their security training. They maybe didn't do it on time, but they completed it eventually. That here's why they were impacted. One, it impacts their audits. Two, we need you up to date on the latest in the industry, but you did complete the training, so great job. And then the last thing, there have been a lot of people who have asked about feedback, surveys, how do we factor that in? This scorecard is a great opportunity to do that. Not only are you asking for feedback on the scorecard itself, but also on your program. Do people understand what they're being asked about here? And so linking out to those in our products is a great way to build that transparent sense of ownership. People who are contributing to that survey will be people who, think they're making a difference and are part of your program. So let's talk a little bit about the workflow side of this and move away from scorecards. Scorecards are a great way to look back at a 90-day window and say, here's what you've done, here's what you've been targeted by, here's how you can improve, here's, the great things you've done, here's more resources, etc. Workflows are automations. They're in the moment, and they're all, well, they can be about remediation training, but today we really want to focus on the positive reinforcement side of it. We want to be talking about how to engage with people on the right things. So, if you noticed on my bio slide earlier, the last slide says training a puppy. My fiance and I got a puppy about a week and a half ago. And, for months, I'm sitting here reading how to train, how to reinforce, puppy house training, sit, stay, all the good stuff, crate training. And the positive reinforcement stuff, right? When they go to the bathroom for the first time outdoors, you shower them with praise. It's throwing treats in front of them. It is complete reinforcement in that moment because they did exactly what we wanted them to do at the time and the place we needed them. We're not that different as humans. It's proven upon it. And here I've got the stat on the slide, 25% reduction in policy violations through positive reinforcement. So our workflows are the mechanism to get that in front of people and to say, thanks for reporting that email. Great job. We really love seeing this. And maybe you don't do it for all emails. Maybe it's not on simulations. It's only on the real ones. But basically telling people what you're doing matters, makes a difference, and here's why is so valuable. I have constantly run into people who don't realize that reporting a phishing email takes it out of the inbox for the whole company if you have the right policies in place. That's a really simple thing that can be included in the communication to tell people, and it often isn't mentioned in there. Other behaviors that you might want to reinforce on, things like optional MFA usage, things like a credential reset, things like, or maybe there are negative behaviors that you want to get involved in, but it's not punitive. For example, maybe you've got a policy change, and starting this year, you're no longer allowing people to use the USB plugs on their computer. Well, traditionally, security awareness would send out a communication that says, here's the policy change. You can't do this anymore. Go sign off on it. Your counterparts in IT would stop that port from working, and that's the end of it. After that, maybe IT is collecting alerts of how many times it happened. It's going through a SIM, but nothing really goes anywhere. Well, what if every time someone clicked or put a USB drive in, even though it's not bringing malware to the company because IT has done their job, what if you're still then immediately reaching out to them within the hour, within the day, and saying, hey, you plugged the USB device in earlier today. This year we've changed our policies. This is no longer something we allow. Here are some other best practices for data file transfers. And you can promote, your internal OneDrive, Google Drive, whatever it is, Box, Dropbox, etc. Promote the right mechanism. That is going to turn someone from being a potential detriment to the risk of the business into a positive contributor of vigilance across the business. And if it's something unique like that, they say, I think if you have a good experience at a restaurant, you tell you tell two people, and a bad experience tells eight. If you send the wrong communication, they're going to go slandering the security department. But a good interaction like that will actually make a difference. You may start to see some of those less quantitative and more qualitative results popping up, like things in Slack and Teams and other channels where people are promoting good things.
3-minute warning.
Yep, thank you, Amanda, which is perfect timing because I'm going to the wins, as I want to talk about metrics in both quantitative and qualitative here. So how do we report on these things? Well, both on scorecards and those workflows, we're going to gather what the user behaviors are afterwards. So you send out organization-wide scorecards on the first day of Q3, and it's looking back at all of Q2. Your call to action is to go open a SharePoint page and to start doing X. Well, in Unify, you're going to create this report that says, as of the first day of the quarter, show me what people are doing with these behaviors. You can see last quarter how they performed, and if there's an uptick this quarter. Now, hopefully you see the uptick, and that's great. If you don't see the uptick, now is your opportunity to reassess. Are we communicating in the right ways? Do we need to make this smoother? Do we need to make it simpler? Is our messaging clear? And Mike talked a little bit about the simplicity that we want to market with in the last session here in this track. That to me is something that I think needs to be factored in. And similarly on the workflows, you engage with someone who does the right thing. Well, now you'll have reporting on, do they continue to do that right thing? Do they become a repeat promoter in a sense of all the right things? And so you'll have some qualitative and you'll have some quantitative wins here between the workflows and the scorecards. And obviously, shameless plug, we here at Living Security are very excited to help you with that journey and bring you down that path. So we are about 90 seconds left here. I know my LinkedIn's in the chat. There's a resource page, the insights.livingsecurity.com page is in there. You can check that out, and I can actually open it quickly and show you what it looks like here on my other screen. But if you're thinking about what behaviors you would want to track and change, things like that, well, that kind of gets you on the right screen, but you can actually come in here and see what insights we can measure, things like that, and start to look at what you would want to take impact on. So I'm going to stop the share, but I'm here to answer any last questions. And I see one from Bernadette here. They're already upset when they have malicious infections. Isn't contacting them putting salt in the wounds? Well, Bernadette, I think it's all about messaging. I think it's all about timing. Maybe you don't want to contact them right away. Maybe it's a week later, and the headline of the email is, "You're not in trouble." We don't want to put salt in the wounds, absolutely. And maybe the email isn't telling them what to do differently, it's but providing different resources, or it's simply explaining how maybe that malware is not in their control. But there are things that they should still be conscious of.